Dick, we've talked about the CFR as being the covert or shadow government that controls our overt government, and how the CFR and the Bilderberg Group both work to create a one world government.
Rick, just how would one start to create a world government? I mean, without using force.
Well, Dick, it's like tackling a big problem. You break it up into smaller pieces. The globalists know they can't just create a world government in one step, so they do it in increments so people don't notice it. The first increment is very far along, and it is called the European Union, or the EU. Now, most Americans have heard of the European Union, but not many really know what it is. So here is a short clip that'll tell us all we need to know about it. It speaks from the British point of view, but it pertains to all member nations of the European Union, whose headquarters are located in Brussels.
It's the true story of Europe. It's the story the politicians don't want you to hear, because it shows how they've deceived us and betrayed our nation. Only in 1994 did Chancellor Kohl's foreign policy spokesman, speaking on behalf of the ruling party of Europe's dominant nation, Germany, clearly reveal the true plan. The plan is to create a federal European superstate. Into it will be merged up to 25 ancient European nations, including our own. This new country, called Europe, will have one parliament, one government, one court of justice, one currency, one flag, and one anthem. That has been the plan all along. But those who favoured it knew the people of Europe would never accept it. They would never willingly surrender their freedoms to become just a province in a vast European superstate. So what did the politicians do? They conspired to keep the truth from the people.
From 1973 onwards, the slow but consistent transfer of power from Westminster to Brussels through successive treaties our own politicians signed.
In case you missed it, the truth that the politicians conspired to keep from the people was the slow but consistent transfer of power from Westminster, local British government, to Brussels, regional government, through a succession of treaties our own politicians signed.
Through successive treaties our own politicians signed, became known as the Acquis Communautaire. It was nicknamed the Ratchet, for once powers had been given to Brussels by the member state, they could never be returned.
Initially, I thought, like everybody else, that we had joined a common market, and what could be nicer and more friendly and sensible and economically wise to do. But since then, in 1975, when we had the vote to remain in that, so we were told, it's become one or two things further than just a common market. It then became, a few years later, a European Economic Community, then a European Community. It's now the European Union, with all sorts of controls and restrictions, regulations, and we're fast approaching, via this new constitution, something that the French have already named potentially a United States of Europe. And I'm not at all sure that that's what I and many others voted to join back in 1975.
In black and white, the draft constitution wording confirms Brussels will exercise competence and primacy over member states' own laws. For the British, this will mean being stripped of any remaining independence, losing control over our foreign policy and armed forces, the handing over of our legal system and law enforcement to the European Union, the scrapping of the pound sterling to be replaced by the euro, the handing over of our remaining currency and gold reserves to the European Central Bank, and the total regulation of British domestic and international trade by the European Union.
I've already noticed that the job of running Britain is increasingly being carried out in Brussels, not by British politicians, but by unaccountable foreign committees most in this country have never even heard of, let alone voted into power.
Let's look at that again. It's already noticed that the job of running Britain is increasingly being carried out in Brussels, not by British politicians, but by unaccountable foreign committees most in this country have never even heard of, let alone voted into power.
These unelected, inscrutable forums dictate what citizens across the Eurozone can and can't do, down to the last detail. Henceforth, Britain is to be ruled from the new Europe, by the new Europe, and for the benefit of the new Europe.
These unelected, inscrutable forums dictate what citizens across the Eurozone can and can't do, down to the last detail. Henceforth, Britain is to be ruled from the new Europe, by the new Europe, and for the benefit of the new Europe.
The powers driving this new superstate have always been, indeed as they are today, France and Germany. Laws of the European Union are drafted not by the Euro Parliament, but by the EU Commission, one of three powerful forums in which the true might of the Union resides. Members of these forums are not elected to their positions, nor, we are told, will they ever be.
Laws of the European Union are drafted not by the Euro Parliament, but by the EU Commission, one of three powerful forums in which the true might of the Union resides. Members of these forums are not elected to their positions, nor, we are told, will they ever be.
When cornered, politicians and public servants routinely tell the British that the EU is just a trading partnership. Yet, underneath the surface, a different picture has emerged. In 2001, a market trader was convicted for selling a pound of bananas weighed using British imperial measures instead of grams and kilos. British District Judge Morgan, in passing judgment upon the hapless metric martyr, stated, "We are now living under a new legal order. The 1972 European Communities Act was a one-off, not an ordinary treaty, but a new way of life. These are new constitutional powers. The British Parliament surrendered its sovereignty in 1972. European laws have overriding force with priority over our British laws. The articles on the supremacy of the British Parliament are now only of historical perspective. They are non-binding."
The new European justice system currently being introduced into the UK is known as Corpus Juris, literally body of law. Corpus Juris is designed completely and permanently to overhaul the British justice system and will include the following.
The scrapping of trial by jury. Henceforth you will face a state-appointed judge who will pronounce you guilty or not guilty. The scrapping of habeas corpus. You are liable to summary arrest without charge. Under Corpus Juris you can be detained without charge or any evidence being presented against you for up to 9 months. The scrapping of innocent until proven guilty. Henceforth, a citizen must prove his innocence against the combined machinery of the state. The scrapping of double jeopardy, or not being tried for the same offence twice. Under EU sanction, Jack Straw, while Home Secretary, gave prosecutors leave to appeal not guilty verdicts if desired. Technically, this could be done repeatedly until the required conviction is secured. The scrapping of non-disclosure. Henceforth, under Corpus Juris, any previous convictions you have will be made available to the court before your trial begins. There is no presumption of innocence.
Being part of the European Union will mean Britain will permanently lose control over her armed forces and foreign policy. The new European army, so enthusiastically pushed by France and Germany, in effect threatens NATO, the organisation that has kept peace in Europe for the past 50 years.
They can use our armed forces, the Crown forces, the Army, the Navy and the Air Force, in the European Rapid Reaction Force. And imagine our forces being under the command of some perhaps French or German general.
And then there's the euro. Joining it will be irreversible, according to Hans Tietmeyer, former president of the German Bundesbank. Monetary union is a path of no return, he states. No subsequent revision or withdrawal of any kind is either legally or politically provided for.
Britain's economy traditionally tracks that of the United States because of our heavy trading on the dollar. So what would be the effect of joining the euro and tying Britain's economy into this one-size-fits-all arrangement with the other nations of the EU?
Brussels wanted to know too, which is why in October 1990 Britain joined something called the European Exchange Rate Mechanism, a dress rehearsal for the euro and monetary union, which effectively locked the British pound into other EU currencies. 23 months of chaos followed. British business suffered its worst recession in 60 years. 100,000 UK businesses went to the wall. Unemployment doubled from 1.5 to 3 million. More bankruptcies were filed than in any previous 2-year period ever. Repossessions of property increased 7-fold. By 1993, over 500,000 of us were at least 3 months in arrears on our mortgages. Britain lost estimated reserves of 68 billion sterling.
And as someone once put it, you may be very friendly with your neighbours, but would you actually hand over complete control of your bank account to your friendly neighbours? Quite probably not. And that's precisely what we would be doing if we joined the euro.
In 2003, British authors Christopher Booker and Richard North released their book, The Great Deception, The Secret History of the European Union. They describe the EU as, quote, a slow-motion coup d'etat, the most spectacular coup d'etat in history. In June 2004, leaders of the EU member nations completed writing the EU Constitution. It boldly proclaims, quote, this Constitution shall have primacy over the law of member states, close quote. Europe's nations have given away their independence.
So British politicians, whom the people elect to represent the interests of the people, are agreeing to treaties that transfer power to unelected bureaucrats in regional government.
Not just British politicians, Dick, but politicians all over Europe. Just think, the European Union grew out of the Marshall Plan and started out as an innocent-looking common market of only 6 countries in 1951. And now 27 European nations that were once free and independent are facing this. The scrapping of trial by jury, the scrapping of habeas corpus, the scrapping of the presumption of innocence, the scrapping of double jeopardy protection. Dick, habeas corpus is a legal protection that guards against unlawful detention. It dates back to the Magna Carta of 1215 and is one of our most fundamental rights. And trial by jury, the presumption of innocence until proven guilty, and double jeopardy, whereby a person cannot be tried twice for the same crime, are all foundational principles of common law going back hundreds of years. What happened?
That's why we're making this video, Rick. We want to demonstrate how incredibly evil the globalists are. And this clip we just showed proves it.
That's right, Dick. And what's happening in Europe, the loss of national sovereignty and all individual rights, is also on the table for the rest of the planet, including North America. Habeas corpus in the U.S. has already been virtually scrapped by the Military Commissions Act of 2006, and the Violent Radicalization and Homegrown Terrorism Prevention Act of 2007 contains language that is so vague that even our own thoughts can be considered crimes. The geopolitical analyst who authored The Story of the Common Market wrote this in 1973. The CFR saw the common market from the first as a regional government to which more and more nations would be added until the world government which the UN had failed to bring about would be realized. At a favorable point in the common market's development, America would be brought in, but the American public had to be softened first and leaders groomed for the changeover. That changeover, Dick, is the second major increment on the road to world government. It's been going on for more than 10 years.
And it's called the North American Union, the NAU for short, Rick. I think this is a good time to discuss the North American Union and how it began.
Okay, you start.
Why me?
Well, you brought it up.
Do I have to do all the work around here?
No, just 50%. Remember, you get half what I get, and
Half of nothing is nothing. All right. On March 23, 2005, President Bush, Mexican President Vicente Fox, and Canadian Prime Minister Paul Martin met secretly in Waco, Texas.
You mean where the three amigos created the Security and Prosperity Partnership?
Oh, you know about that?
Do you mean with a meeting where they agreed to merge Mexico, Canada, the United States into a single political entity called the North American Union without the consent of the Congress of the American people?
The very same.
Where the only borders would be on the perimeter of the continent, south of Mexico, north of Canada, and east and west along the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, all without the consent of the Congress or the American people?
You've got it.
With a single currency called the Amero and a lot of laws coming from unelected bureaucrats? Without the consent of the Congress or the American people?
You know a lot about it, don't you?
Never heard of it.
And neither have most other Americans.
So let's connect the dots, Dick.
The Waco meeting in 2005 is where Bush 43, Fox and Martin, the three amigos, created the Security and Prosperity Partnership, or SPP, which critics have claimed is a plan to create a supranational state modeled after the European Union and to be known as the North American Union.
Merging Mexico, Canada, the United States into the North American Union means that no boundaries will exist between these countries, and that their monetary units, the Canadian and US dollars and the Mexican peso, will be replaced with a new one called the Amero.
Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? There will be no border checkpoints to hassle with and no currency conversions.
Well, Dick, if this is such a good idea, why has there been a near total media blackout about it? Wouldn't something as wonderful as a North American Union be front page news?
Those are very good questions, Rick.
I thought so.
The trouble is, most Americans get their news from the mass media. So when the people don't hear about something in the news, they don't know enough to even ask such questions, let alone demand to know what this North American Union is all about.
Oh, just like if you don't hear about the forecast for snow, you don't know to ask how many inches are going to fall.
Because you don't know it's going to snow in the first place.
Or rain, for those who don't live in the snow belt. But the one exception to the media blackout is CNN's Lou Dobbs, who has been talking about the North American Union for the past 2 years. Here is part of one of his broadcasts from 2006.
The Bush administration's open borders policy and its decision to ignore the enforcement of this country's immigration laws is part of a broader agenda.
Hold on. Let's repeat that. The Bush administration's open borders policy and its decision to ignore the enforcement of this country's immigration laws is part of a broader agenda.
President Bush signed a formal agreement that will end the United States as we know it, and he took the step without approval from either the U.S. Congress or the people of the United States.
Listen to that again. President Bush signed a formal agreement that will end the United States as we know it, and he took the step without the approval of either the U.S. Congress or the people of the United States.
Bill Tucker reports.
The Security and Prosperity Partnership of North America sounds benign, hardly like a policy that critics call NAFTA on steroids. It's a deal that few have even heard of.
It's being done again by very few people at the very top on behalf of the investment class, but the working class of people. Political officials across our country, from communities, from cities and so forth, they don't know anything about this.
Yet it was agreed to by Mexico's President Fox, Canada's Prime Minister Martin, and President Bush in 2005. Administration officials counter their critics by saying everything about SPP is on the White House website. And they say the partnership is not a treaty, but more of an outline of priorities between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. Still, some wonder why there haven't been public discussions about the goals being pursued.
This SPP includes, for instance, a committee that is sitting down to harmonize our meat inspection and food safety. So how far away from a trade agreement can your dining room table and what you feed your kids be?
Other parts of the agreement mention border security as an issue, which include all of North America. In fact, the name of the agreement is not Security and Prosperity of the United States, but of North America.
When we elect officials, we expect them to act on our behalf. When we get involved in cooperative frameworks with other countries for joint regulation of fisheries or rail transportation or the skies, we're basically sharing our sovereignty with that government and outsourcing some of what we give our elected officials.
As disturbing as some find SPP, there is legislation in the House introduced by Florida's Katherine Harris that closely resembles the goals of the partnership. Included in that bill is a section which calls for the securing of Mexico's southern border by the United States and Canada. Lou, that's not the border with the United States, that's the border they share with Belize and Guatemala.
The idea that the White House would respond that this is on their website, this involves intricate workings amongst the Commerce Department of this country and Canada and Mexico's, of course, a regional prosperity and security program. This is absolute ignorance. And the fact that we reported this, we should point out, when it was signed. But as we watch this thing progress, these working groups are continuing, they're intensifying. What in the world are these people thinking about?
Well, they say, look, these are a declaration and an outline of our priorities. And when I called them today, Lou, they said I was the first phone call they had received literally since the deal was first signed. So people are not paying attention, and they're letting them, in fact, get away with this.
You know, I was asked the other day about whether or not I really thought the American people had the stomach to stand up and stop this nonsense, this direction from a group of elites in absolute contravention of our law, of our Constitution, every national value. And I hope, I pray that I'm right when I said yes. But this is beyond belief.
Dick, let's pretend that you and I are hearing about this for the first time. We don't know anything about what Dobbs said. What does Security and Prosperity Partnership sound like to you?
It sounds pretty good. It's good to know that our leaders are meeting to give us more security and prosperity.
But security and prosperity for whom?
What do you mean, for us, the people who elected them as our leaders?
Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but the SPP is not a plan to provide security and prosperity for the people. Just the opposite, in fact.
Do you mean to tell me that our government leaders are deceiving us?
Well, impossible though it may be to believe, our government leaders are indeed deceiving us.
Well, how deceptive can they be if Lou Dobbs talks about it?
You haven't seen anything about it on network television, radio, or the newspapers and magazines, have you?
Well, no.
No. Only on Lou Dobbs' show. And the only way to see him on television is if you have cable access.
Now, wait a minute. If our president made an agreement to end the United States as an independent country by merging it with Canada and Mexico, that's major news. What a scoop that would be. How can NBC, CBS, and ABC News have missed it?
They didn't miss it, Dick. They are ignoring it.
Don't tell me. Even Fox News?
Especially Fox News.
Fox News, I'm flabbergasted. Why?
Dick, aren't you being just a little facetious?
Who, me? Facetious? Never.
Well, we're going to explain why in this video.
Why I'm facetious?
No, why you won't see this in the news. To understand how we are being deceived about the North American Union, we need to look at so-called free trade agreements, such as NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, because NAFTA laid the foundation for the North American Union. At the Bilderberg meeting in 1991, David Rockefeller told the virtually unknown governor of Arkansas, Bill Clinton, why NAFTA was a priority and that the Bilderbergers wanted him to support it. Clinton had already been anointed as the next American president, so as soon as he left the meeting, he went to Moscow. Why? Well, in the words of investigator Daniel Estulin,
it appears that President Clinton was sent by the Bilderbergers directly to Moscow to get his KGB student-era anti-Vietnam War files buried before he announced his candidacy for the U.S. presidency, which occurred some 2.5 months later.
So Bill Clinton's past had to be sanitized to help make him more palatable to the electorate, so he could then become their president and further implement the Bilderbergers' agenda. Less than a year after being sworn into office, President Clinton signed NAFTA into law in 1993, binding our government to NAFTA's regulations.
In the October 1st, 1993 Wall Street Journal, David Rockefeller said, "Grasping the moment means, first of all, winning the support of the American people, the administration, and Congress for NAFTA. Everything is in place, after 500 years, to build a true new world in the Western Hemisphere."
Notice that Rockefeller said winning support for NAFTA is first. What he has in mind for second is for the United States to give up its sovereignty, Constitution, and Bill of Rights to build his true new world. Now, who elected him to determine our national destiny? What authority does he have, Dick?
Rick, NAFTA's governing body is a commission of cabinet-level appointees from each country. The commission is implemented by a secretariat consisting of commission appointees.
So the people who run NAFTA are appointed by bureaucrats, not elected by constituents. Thus, they are unaccountable to the American people.
This is intentional, and in fact is a pervasive strategy of the globalists.
And that strategy, Dick, is the removal of elected, representative, accountable government and the substitution of unelected, unrepresentative, unaccountable government. Government by selection, not election. Exactly what is happening in the European Union. This is a direct violation of the American system of government, whose backbone was clearly expressed in the Declaration of Independence. Governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed.
At the time he signed it into law, President Clinton said that NAFTA would create 200,000 U.S. jobs in its first 2 years, 1 million jobs in its first 5 years, $100 billion trade surpluses with Mexico by 2005.
With all these supposedly very smart people having made such glowing predictions, let's see how they've turned out. Dick, why don't you show us NAFTA's report card?
More than 1 million jobs, mostly in higher-wage manufacturing industries, were lost due to NAFTA, as companies moved plants and jobs to Mexico. Far more than 1 million jobs were lost internally, as illegal aliens from Mexico increasingly replaced American workers here in the United States. The United States has accumulated current account deficits of almost $400 billion with Mexico since the birth of NAFTA. Countless U.S. factories have been closed and rebuilt in Mexico. The U.S. manufacturing base has shrunk dramatically, and our nation is becoming a mere service provider. The southern border of the United States remains wide open, and federal government promises to close it are not being fulfilled, and the government has no intention of ever doing so. I repeat, the government has never had any intention of protecting the border.
Rulings from NAFTA's judicial panels have superseded state and federal court decisions. After a NAFTA tribunal overturned a Massachusetts Supreme Court decision in April 2004, Chief Justice Ronald George of the California Supreme Court commented, quote, "There are grave implications here. It's rather shocking that the highest courts of the state and federal governments could have their judgments circumvented by these tribunals." Close quote. NAFTA established a legal foundation for the integration of the U.S., Canada, and Mexico via the Security and Prosperity Partnership North American Union. These two initiatives are steps toward duplicating for the entire Western Hemisphere the centralized government system already compromising the independence of the nations of the European Union.
This is exactly the opposite of what NAFTA advocates predicted would happen.
Dick, if NAFTA were truly about free trade, its legislative text shouldn't have run more than a couple of pages. But the NAFTA agreement that Clinton signed into law was 1,700 pages.
It makes you wonder what the other 1,698 pages are for.
They are for transferring the power to regulate trade over to regional bureaucracies outside the authority of Congress. NAFTA and all the other so-called free trade agreements are not at all about free trade, but about managed trade. These agreements take powers away from the nation states and give them to unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats.
All under the masquerade of promoting free trade as a benefit.
So, NAFTA has been either a spectacular failure
or a spectacular success. It depends on your point of view. Who has benefited from NAFTA?
Well, it's not too difficult to figure that out, Dick. It's the big corporations who have moved their operations to Mexico, where they can make their products for less but get the same price as before. And of course, the globalists benefit.
And who has been hurt by NAFTA?
Just about everybody else who isn't rich or a member of the elite.
So, if what's happening in North America is based on the European Union prototype, then NAFTA was intentionally designed to lead to the political and economic integration of the NAFTA partners.
And this is what the globalists are planning for us in the Americas. There's one main difference, however. It took them about 50 years to create the European Union. The North American Union is a highly accelerated version of the EU. The globalists want it up and running by 2010.
The plan is described in Building a North American Community, a task force report put out by the CFR. The word community is used to imply that this is a cooperative group with everybody working together, but it is a euphemism for union. This CFR report, in fact, is full of euphemisms. For example, it says that Canada and the United States should consider eliminating restrictions on labor mobility altogether and work towards solutions that, in the long run, could enable the extension of full labor mobility to Mexico as well.
Full labor mobility throughout North America may sound nice, Dick, but what it really means is no borders between the United States, Mexico, and Canada.
And that is why the federal government has stopped enforcing our immigration laws.
That's right, Dick. U.S. immigration laws have not been repealed legislatively by Congress. Instead, these laws are being deliberately ignored by a government that is mandated by the Constitution to serve and protect the American people. Americans need to ask themselves why immigration laws that have been on the books for years, many of them since the 1920s, are being treated as if they never existed, and then think about why our Congress keeps trying to pass comprehensive immigration reform as the solution to our failed border security. If the government ignores existing laws, why is it pushing for more laws?
A closer look at that comprehensive immigration reform legislation turns up provisions designed to legalize the 12 to 20 million illegals who are already in this country by granting them amnesty. But these provisions are buried deep within these reform bills, sometimes disguised as benefits. Sometimes they are riders attached to other bills that already have wide support of the Congress to increase their chances of passage into law.
Congress has been promoting amnesty since 1965, when Senator Ted Kennedy, as the Senate Immigration Subcommittee chairman, was instrumental in driving the legislation that removed the quotas based on natural origin and introduced chain migration, the policy that allows citizens and lawful permanent residents to bring in their extended non-nuclear family members. This legislation kicked off the massive immigration we see today. To sell the American people on it, Kennedy reassured us, "The bill will not flood our cities with immigrants. It will not upset the ethnic mix of our society. It will not relax the standards of admission. It will not cause American workers to lose their jobs." But contrary to what Senator Kennedy said, that legislation did all of those things.
Rick, that's because the globalists behind the government are pushing amnesty for subversive, not humanitarian purposes. Without amnesty, the government would have to account for the millions of illegal aliens scattered about our country. But with amnesty, those aliens would become legal residents, regardless of whether they assimilate or not, and the government would be off the hook. So it creates incentives for illegals to come here.
Of course, the globalists can't reveal their true intentions, or the American people would stop them. So they pretend the government is too incompetent or lacks the resources to implement immigration laws and secure the borders. Then they try to pass some kind of reform as though there's something wrong with the law. But there's nothing wrong with the law, Dick, just the people responsible for enforcing it. The government could close our border within 24 hours, but it will not do that. Instead, it arrests and imprisons Border Patrol agents for doing their job and tells the Mexican government where the Minutemen are located so the illegals can avoid them. It passes legislation to construct a border fence but doesn't appropriate any money for it and never will. It lobbies Congress for laws that are amnesties in disguise. It pushes H-1B visas to favor hiring foreign workers over American workers. It promotes sanctuary cities, IDs, and driver's licenses for illegal aliens. It passes the Real ID Act on the pretense that it would solve the illegal alien issue by forcing states to implement national standards for driver's licenses. But it really creates a de facto national ID system, with the very real possibility of capturing and storing biometric information in a national database. The government does everything it can to keep the borders open and to encourage people to come here illegally.
Clearly, these are deliberate actions. The obvious reason is that the government is using illegal immigration to create a de facto NAU. By not maintaining border integrity, the globalists are effectively erasing the borders. The less obvious reason is that no borders means the end of our country's independence and the end of the Constitution, as we are absorbed into the regional government of the North American Union. So open borders and illegal immigration are tied together to achieve the same objective.
The government purposely created this problem in the first place by refusing to enforce existing immigration laws so it could offer the solution of the NAU.
That is why the American government is using the American military to protect borders in other countries, but not around our own country.
And that is why our country is being overwhelmed with the expenses, crime, and job losses caused by massive illegal immigration.
Every American should be asking at least one question. Why do we have the USA Patriot Act and Homeland Security, supposedly to protect us from terrorism? And why are we engaged in a war against terror, at home and abroad, when our national borders are wide open?
Now, for those of you who are hearing this and thinking, so, who cares? Who needs borders? Maybe it's a good idea for the countries to be integrated. Or, free trade sounds great. Or, I never use my American citizenship anyway. What does it do for me? Consider this. The Bush administration and its friends in the mass media deny that plans exist to create a North American Union based on the model of the European Union. But in September 2006, high-profile representatives from the US, Canada, and Mexico gathered at a resort in Banff, Canada, for a secret closed-door meeting of the North American Forum. This was the second such secret meeting after the three amigos agreed to form the Security and Prosperity Partnership. Participants at this secret gathering included former Secretary of State George Shultz, who served as a co-chairman, then Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, former U.S. Trade Representative Carla Hills, a key author of NAFTA, Wall Street Journal columnist Mary Anastasia O'Grady, and several former cabinet officers, government officials, and media heavyweights from the three countries. Topics discussed were energy, security, border infrastructure, and North American integration. In the official conference record of the speeches, the phrase evolution by stealth was used to describe the idea of bringing more people on board with the plan.
Mel Hurtig, a Canadian who attended the session and didn't like what he heard, went public with details about it. Interviewed on a Canadian television program in September 2006, he said, "We're talking about such an important thing. We're talking about the integration of Canada and Mexico into the United States. For them to hold this meeting in secret and to make every effort to avoid anybody learning about it, right away you've got to be hugely concerned." In 2002, Vicente Fox openly admitted, quote, "Eventually our long-range objective is to establish an ensemble of connections and institutions similar to those created by the European Union."
Dick, there is yet another ominous aspect to the North American Union that we mentioned earlier, and that is the plan to replace the Mexican peso and the American and Canadian dollar with the Amero, the North American counterpart of the euro. A little background information is in order here. Experts are now predicting that the collapse of the US dollar is imminent. In 1913, international bankers created the Federal Reserve through tremendous deception, trickery, and secrecy. Since then, this central bank has transferred $20 trillion from the pockets of hard-working Americans to the pockets of the non-working bankers. In the process, the Federal Reserve has created a $9 trillion national debt, which by the year 2012 will require every last tax dollar collected to pay the interest on that debt. This will leave the United States bankrupt. So, what will our corrupt government do? The bankers will introduce the Amero as our salvation, without acknowledging that they were the cause of the crisis in the first place. Only this time, instead of cheating just Americans, they will cheat all of North America out of untold future trillions of Ameros. You can be certain that any Ameros you receive in exchange for dollars will be worth far less than the dollar, which today is worth about 4% of what it was in 1913.
The general public knows nothing about the impending United States bankruptcy.
You mean it hasn't been covered by Fox News?
Nor NBC, ABC, or CBS News, nor the New York Times, Chicago Tribune, and so on. It will be interesting, however, to watch the mass media to see how the government lies about the reason we have to form the North American Union and replace the dollar with the Amero. Dear President Bush, how about telling the American people right now what the North American Union is all about, so there can be time for a national debate?
Oh, that's exactly what he doesn't want, which is why the whole thing is being done in secret, and of course, without the consent of the Congress or the American people. Dick, another giant part of the creation of a North American Union is the construction of what is being called the NAFTA superhighway. The plan calls for a huge 10-lane road for cars and trucks, with more lanes for oil and gas lines, and still more for railroad lines. Its starting project is the Trans-Texas Corridor. The master plan calls for 80 separate but interconnected high-priority corridors like the one you see on the screen, to be built throughout the entire North American Union. These 80 corridors make up the NAFTA superhighway and are designed to link the three North American nations from the southern tip of Mexico through the United States and into Canada. The map you see on the screen is a conceptualization of these superhighways. They will transport freight from Asia arriving at ports in southern Mexico that are already controlled by communist China. Cheaper Mexican truckers and longshoremen will replace their more expensive counterparts in the United States. These corridors are intended to speed the expected increased flow of goods from China and other countries while lowering the costs of importing them. But these corridors will also provide easy access for drug dealers and other criminals entering the United States. The project will further require the confiscation of millions of acres of privately owned property by eminent domain, or I should say eminent domain abuse. Of course, such trade corridors would be unnecessary if not for the federal government's long-term excessive regulation and taxation, which discourages U.S. manufacturing competitiveness. But such repression is intentional, all part of the plan to decimate manufacturing. As a result, ships now leave U.S. docks nearly empty. One of our biggest ports, the Port of Long Beach in California, was importing $36 billion in goods from China annually in 2004, but exporting only $3 billion, a deficit of $33 billion. In fact, the United States has gone from a trade surplus nation to a trade deficit nation. For the first time in our history, our nation is a net importer of food, which means that we don't produce all the food we need for ourselves, so we must import it. And we're all aware of the recent news headlines about the substandard, even dangerous products made in China, such as cough medicine and toothpaste containing diethylene glycol, the main ingredient in antifreeze, or lead paint in children's toys. Our leaders and corporations are selling us out to bring in cheap, substandard goods while they reap huge profits at our expense.
Rick, here's a clip of the 39th Legislative Assembly of the Province of Manitoba, Canada, from November 2007, which gives us a perspective on these trade corridors being built in Canada.
Mr. Speaker, members of the Manitoba Legislature, welcome to the second session of the 39th Legislative Assembly of the Province of Manitoba. In addition, Manitoba has been working with the Canadian government and state governments in the U.S. to protect and enhance our access to key trade markets. In response to U.S. border security measures, Manitoba will begin offering an enhanced driver's license as an affordable and secure form of identification for travelers. The new license will be available in the fall of 2008. Manitoba is also taking a major role in the development of a mid-continent trade corridor, connecting our northern port of Churchill with trade markets throughout the central U.S. and Mexico. To advance the concept, an alliance has been built with business leaders and state and city governments spanning the entire length of the corridor. When fully developed, the trade route will incorporate an inland port in Winnipeg with pre-clearance for international shipping.
Notice that the Assembly mentioned an enhanced driver's license, which sounds a lot like our Real ID that was supposed to be implemented by the states by May of 2008, and an inland port in Winnipeg with pre-clearance for international shipping. Well, part of this trade corridor highway plan is an agreement between the U.S. and Mexican governments to build a Mexican customs office at Smartport, an inland port facility in, of all places, Kansas City, Missouri. According to its proponents, this is a pilot project to allow freight moving southbound to Mexico to clear in Kansas City, seal the shipment on the truck, and enable border crossings to become seamless. Now, Dick, what does enabling border crossings to become seamless mean to you?
That's easy. It means no borders.
That's what it means to me, too. If seamless means no seam, and if a border is a seam, then seamless means no border. Imports are intended to be moving seamlessly as well. They will be inspected in the originating country, which for most goods means China and other third world countries. They will then be monitored electronically en route. They will be unloaded at Lazaro Cardenas in Mexico, then trucked right over the Texas-Mexico line on the Trans-Texas Highway to Smartport in Kansas City. These containers will move the entire way virtually unchecked until they get to the middle of the United States. Not only will there be a customs office in Kansas City, but the land on which it sits will be considered to be sovereign Mexican territory, Dick. Kansas City officials deny it, but WorldNet Daily has obtained documents showing that Smartport spent 2 years trying to get Mexico to agree to establish the customs office there, and a letter from the president of the KC Smartport saying that the Mexican customs office space would need to be designated as Mexican sovereign territory and meet certain requirements.
Why is the Mexican customs port going to be in Kansas City? That's in the middle of the country, the heartland. Shouldn't it be on the Mexican-United States border?
You're forgetting something, Dick.
What's that?
There will be no border. It'll all be one big happy North American Union.
Do you mean that when Dorothy clicks her heels together to go home, she'll end up in Mexico?
I'm afraid so, Dick. There is definitely a man behind the curtain whom we should be paying attention to. As Congressman Ron Paul explained, the proposed highway is part of a broader plan advanced by a quasi-government organization called the Security and Prosperity Partnership of North America. It is an extension of government-managed trade schemes like NAFTA. The real issue is national sovereignty.
Congressman Virgil Goode introduced an anti-NAFTA resolution in 2007, quote, expressing the sense of Congress that the President should provide notice of withdrawal of the United States from NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement.
But for most of our politicians, Dick, it's business as usual. Former presidential candidate Rudy Giuliani, for example, seized upon the Trans-Texas NAFTA superhighway as a U.S. Grade A prime chance to fatten his wallet. The law firm in which he is a senior partner is acting as the exclusive legal counsel to Cintra, the Spanish company that has been granted the right to build the highway. One should question not only why Mr. Giuliani's involvement in the NAFTA superhighway has never been publicly addressed, but why a foreign company was awarded the building of a mass highway system for the first time in U.S. history, and why it was negotiated by the law firm of a Republican candidate running for the President of the United States. The Wikipedia entry for Cintra says this: Governor Rick Perry of Texas has refused to release many of the details of the $1.3 billion contract his administration has signed with Cintra for a toll road from Austin to Seguin as part of the Trans-Texas Corridor. The Spanish company has had a close relationship with the governor's office. Perry's former legislative director, Dan Shelley, worked as a Cintra consultant and lobbyist prior to joining the governor's staff, and in September 2005, he went back to work for Cintra. Both he and his daughter, Jennifer Shelley Rodriguez, now have lucrative contracts to lobby Texas legislators on the company's behalf.
Governor Rick Perry attended the 2007 Istanbul Bilderberg meeting to receive his orders from David Rockefeller to pave the way for the North American Union in Texas. Here is a traitor that will sell his country out for 30 pieces of silver.
Dick, it's comforting to know that cronyism and nepotism are alive and well down there in Texas.
It must be time for you to be a little facetious.
Just a little.
It is certainly no little coincidence that Giuliani clients with an interest in acquiring Texas roads and infrastructure for this project also invested in his presidential campaign. This could explain why Giuliani spent as much time fundraising in Texas. The moneyed proponents of the Trans-Texas Corridor, of which there are many, would have liked to see this man become president.
Well, here's an item that attests to Giuliani's character. Ryan Sanger of the New York Sun reports that before he became a private businessman with global clients, Giuliani opposed NAFTA. Dick, the fact that Rudy Giuliani has done such an about-face on so vital an issue as this qualifies him as one of the great criminal opportunists of all time.
Now I know you're not being facetious. A Washington Post article dated May 13, 2007, disclosed that Giuliani's secretive lobbying firm, Giuliani Partners, had made more than $100 billion over the last 5 years, and that clients of Giuliani Partners are required to sign confidentiality agreements, so they do not comment about the work they receive or how much they are paying for it. Though now running for president, Giuliani refuses to identify his clients, disclose his compensation, or reveal any details about Giuliani Partners. He also declined to be interviewed about the firm. Because of this secrecy, a request to visit his wood-paneled offices overlooking Times Square was turned down. A complete picture of the firm and its business is difficult to obtain. This report is based on a review of corporate, government, and court records, along with scores of interviews with clients and government officials who have interacted with Giuliani Partners.
Dick, one question most Americans would probably have is how the globalists can merge the three countries into a single union and build a massive superhighway system through this union without most of the American people knowing about it.
It's not that difficult when you control the money and the media.
And where is our Congress in all of this, Dick?
Mostly in the dark.
Congress in the dark about something? How quaint.
Reminds me of that quip by Mark Twain.
Which quip?
Suppose you were an idiot. And suppose you were a member of Congress. Oh, but I repeat myself.
Very good, Dick. And Twain died. While Bush was on stage, he was asked several questions by a Canadian reporter. Of course, there were no American reporters present. The questions were,
Thank you. As you three leaders meet here, there are a growing number of people in each of your countries who have expressed concern about the Security and Prosperity Partnership. This is addressed to all three of you. Can you say today that this is not a prelude to a North American Union, similar to a European Union? Are there plans to build some kind of superhighway connecting all three countries? And do you believe all of these theories about a possible erosion of national identity stem from a lack of transparency from this partnership?
Here is Bush's reply.
And I'm amused by some of the speculation, some of the old, you call them political scare tactics. If you've been in politics as long as I have, you get used to that kind of technique, where you lay out a conspiracy and then force people to try to prove it doesn't exist. That's just the way some people operate.
Notice that Bush was asked 3 questions and never answered any of them, including, quote, are there plans to build some kind of superhighway connecting all 3 countries? Hiding behind the prerogatives of the presidency and the complicity of the mass media, George Bush is the absolute master of deceit. A large number of high-ranking members of the Bush administration have publicly stated that there is no plan to build a superhighway. Yet, you saw that clip of the 39th Legislative Assembly of Manitoba discussing how the province is moving right along with the highway. Let's see it again.
Manitoba is also taking a major role in the development of a mid-continent trade corridor, connecting our northern port of Churchill with trade markets throughout the central U.S. and Mexico. To advance the concept, an alliance has been built with business leaders and state and city governments spanning the entire length of the corridor. When fully developed, the trade route will incorporate an inland port in Winnipeg with pre-clearance for international shipping.
Rick, it boggles the mind to know that the President of the United States attended a meeting in Canada that would dramatically change the destiny of the entire North American continent, and not a word about that meeting has appeared in the United States media. Nor have the United States media reported on Bush's attendance at the 2 previous SPP summit meetings. And more importantly, President Bush has certainly never reported directly to the American people about his involvement. Rick, the enormity of all this secrecy and lying is beyond belief. Every U.S. citizen who attended the Montebello meeting must be indicted for treason, and chief traitor George Bush must be at the head of the list.
Dick, denial is almost always the first tactic used by globalists, especially when their secrets begin to leak out. And those few in the media who are bold enough to expose any part of the real agenda can be censored in other ways, such as the newspapers in Texas and Oklahoma.
Texas and Oklahoma are the first states through which the Trans-Texas Corridor part of the NAFTA superhighway will traverse. And several dozen newspapers there have been severely critical of this project. So what did the globalists do? They bought them out.
Could it be that they had an overwhelming interest in journalism, Dick?
Oh yeah, that must have been the reason.
Well, let's see. According to the newspaper.com,
Australian toll road giant Macquarie agreed in January 2007 to purchase 40 local newspapers, primarily in Texas and Oklahoma, for $80 million. Macquarie Bank is Australia's largest capital-raising firm and has invested billions in purchasing roads in the US, Canada, and UK.
Rick, the closer you look, the more it seems like 1915 all over again, when the Morgan and Rockefeller interests bought out those 25 major newspapers. Sal Costello, founder of TexasTollParty.com, an organization committed to fighting the implementation of the international toll roads, appeared on Alex Jones's nationally syndicated KLBJ show on January 28, 2007, and discussed this buyout. He said, "This issue is about a foreign corporation coming in, and it's about editorial independence. It's buying these newspapers, dozens of them, and they've had hundreds of stories over the past couple of years slamming the Trans-Texas Corridor. They've been very vocal in educating their communities all over Texas. So you have these newspapers saying there's something wrong here. It stinks. These newspapers have been very vocal. And this one corporation comes in and buys them up, buys the whole news group, which is dozens of them. And basically this kills editorial independence.
And there you have it, Dick. The objective is to kill editorial independence, not to promote good, honest journalism. Just to be sure we're all on the same page here. Although the Texas Department of Transportation is overseeing the Trans-Texas Corridor project, the construction contract is owned by the Cintra Corporation, and Cintra is owned by King Juan Carlos of Spain. Financing for the project will come from highway tolls to be collected by GPS tracking devices that will be installed in all vehicles. And it's being done without the consent of the Congress or the American people. One part of the Trans-Texas Corridor, which is expected to run some 4,000 miles, carries an estimated cost of $183 billion, which will be financed by huge increases in federal, state, and local taxes, and by the conversion of scores of existing roads to toll roads, which taxpayers have already paid for. And Cintra, the Spanish company represented in the United States by Rudy Giuliani's law firm, will collect these tolls for the next 50 years. As Congressman Ron Paul put it, the costs will be socialized and the profits privatized.
Rick, that's incredible beyond words.
Not only that, Dick, but students from 10 universities in the U.S., Mexico, and Canada, including Harvard and American University, have already begun taking part in an annual simulated model parliament. They met in the Mexican Senate for 5 days in May of 2006 and discussed draft bills on trade corridors, immigration, and provisions of NAFTA. A similar event took place in the Canadian Senate in 2005.
So the globalists are conditioning students to accept the North American Union as if it already exists.
That's right. The French call that a fait accompli.
Incredible. So they teach the North American Union in the schools.
But not a word about it in the national media, who have strict instructions never to mention certain subjects or to discredit those who do mention them.
So, Rick, how are the globalists actually going to implement the North American Union?
Why are you asking me, Dick? I'm not a globalist.
But if you were, how would you do it?
Well, that's different. Since the European Union is the prototype for the North American Union, I would copy that. I mean, why reinvent the wheel? Let's return to our fly-on-the-wall reporter to see how David Rockefeller and Henry Kissinger are building their regional government in the Western Hemisphere.
Henry, I'm very disappointed. The North American Union is taking much too long. What's the holdup?
We're moving as fast as we can, David. We're using the same plan that's worked so well in Europe. We started out with that industrial community treaty with 6 countries after World War II. Then we got them to sign the Treaties of Rome to create the Common Market in 1957. Then we used more treaties to create the European Community, and then the European Union. And each time any political, business, or military big mouth tried to tell others what we were really doing, we used the usual methods to neutralize them. Bribery and intimidation usually did the trick, David, but we also had to launch media campaigns to ruin their credibility and destroy their careers.
That's just the cost of doing business. It's to be expected. But damn it, Henry, Europe took too long. We can't take 50 years in North America. Haven't we learned from our mistakes?
Europe took longer because we didn't have as much media control there as we do in the U.S., so we were forced to make the changes in plain view of the public. But of course, we were able to put enough spin into what we told the public so they bought into it.
So it should go even faster in North America with our control of the American media. Besides, we have a lot more power in the United States Congress than we ever did in the European parliaments. We pay a lot of money for that kind of power. Let's put it to good use.
Well, if we rush it, David, if we move too fast, we'll risk showing our hand too soon. The jig will be up and then we'll be ruined.
I don't care. We've already spent a lot of money on North America. Spend more if you have to. I want it wrapped up by 2010.
Look, we've already got the U.S. as a NAFTA signatory, and that took less time than the common market. Now, it's true that Brussels has been much more aggressive in overruling the EU member nations, but the NAFTA tribunals are starting to overturn U.S. court decisions. It's working.
Yes, but the whole economic integration in Europe took 35 years, and it's still not finished. That's the model for the Security and Prosperity Partnership. Are you telling me that the SPP is also going to take 35 years? That's intolerable.
Oh, maybe the target date was too early or too ambitious. Again, if we show our hand too soon, we're finished. The people will find out what we're really up to.
Forget about them. Spend more money. Push the pro-immigration folks and give them plenty of media. Make more policies to get Mexican trucks full access to the United States. Lean on Bush to get it done. Throw more money at the SPP people. How many illegals are crossing the Mexican border each day?
About 10,000.
Make it 20,000. No, 50,000. France is being overrun by North African and Arab immigrants. There are 500,000 illegals going into the European Union every year. I want 15 to 20 million Hispanics crashing the United States. I don't care how much it costs or how we do it. Just get it done. Get rid of those borders. We've got to merge the economies. Keep the Border Patrol away and tell Ted Kennedy that he'd better find a way to get those amnesties passed through Congress or else.
There's been a lot of grassroots resistance to the immigration reform legislation, David. No matter how we disguise the amnesty, the protesters find out about it anyway.
The American people will never catch on. They're too dumb.
No, I don't think so, David. They're seeing through our legislative tricks. They've stopped the Congress several times. More and more of them know about the North American Union. I wouldn't put it past them.
If they resist too much, we'll kill the U.S. dollar sooner than planned.
Wait a minute, wouldn't that risk exposing us? We didn't need a crisis in Europe, you know.
When the people are broke and starving, when they've got no money and no food, they'll be clamoring for salvation. Then we can move in with that new currency. What's it called again?
The Amero.
Yeah, the Amero. I like the sound of that. Rhymes with euro. In the meantime, we'll continue to implement laws like we do in Europe by commissions and forums rather than parliaments. When the economy collapses, we'll bring in the North American community and then the North American Union, complete with one constitution, our constitution, not the one from 1776 or whenever it was that's tied our hands all these years.
I think it was 1787.
Who the hell cares? As Bush said, it's just a goddamn piece of paper.
Dear Mr. Rockefeller, is that accurate? Is that the way you and your fellow globalists are planning to turn North America into a third world province in your world government?
If not, we invite you to go on national television and tell us where we have erred. We would be happy to issue a retraction.
Dick, we know who is giving the instructions to the media about what they report. We know their plan, and we know how they are implementing it. So the question now is, how can a small group of globalists get others to help them reach their goal?
With lots of money. Building a world government is very expensive.
Agreed. But where does it all come from? That's what we're going to look at next.
Did Part 2 hold any more surprises for you? Well, if you think the North American Union is bad, wait till you see Part 3.